Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game Podcast. And we have, as usual, a very special guest today. We have Michael, who has been already on the show. But before we get started this time, Michael, are you prepared to engage?
You bet.
Let's do this, because if you don't know him, I don't know what world you're living. We have today Michael Matera, who is an engaging, fun, and inspiring nationwide speaker and author who delivers keynotes, workshops, and small group professional development to teachers and administration. And of course, he is a practicing teacher. He is igniting both his classroom and professional development audiences with interactive play, passion, and purpose-driven learning. And he helps us all focus on finding the joy in the journey of life, both professionally as well as personally. He is also the host and creator of the Hive Summit. He's a gamification guru, moonshot thinker. He transforms the traditional classroom into a high-energy environment where active student engagement is paramount. He is an energetic trainer. He broadly shares his research, his teaching methods, and technological applications for the advancement of learners, teachers, administrators. And as a consultant, he works with educational institutions and businesses to define the needs and build solutions that inspire and head to effective change. He also has a podcast, which is also transmitted with video. You can find him on YouTube and many other places as well. He has a webpage, and you can discover his most recent pioneering endeavors visiting mrmatera.com. The podcast is called Well Played, or you can look at the YouTube channel that I mentioned before. And always, of course, remember to connect with him. So, Michael, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that is missing from that intro?
I don't think so. That was pretty robust.
Looks good. So, Michael, when we start these interviews, we always like to think of what does a regular or a normal day look like for our guests. Of course, we are nowadays in the midst of a pandemic. So the regular days now are not necessarily the same that they were 9-10 months ago, right? So what does it look like? Maybe, these end up being sometimes funny stories of the different things that have changed so much in these days.
So definitely in the middle of a pandemic here, the regular day looks way different. I sort of joke with people that I feel like we're trying to figure out how to do 1950s teaching, in like rows and desks and that kind of thing. Like we're trying to figure out the better way to do that, because at our school, I'm teaching in a hybrid model. So I have kind of Zoom up with like some of my online kids, and then I have in-person kids and trying to figure out the best way to do that. So my day looks way different than how it used to, where I usually have like 5 tables in my room and kids are always working on collaborative things together and creatively like working together. And now they find themselves 6 feet apart with masks, and then some kids over Zoom. So wildly different day, but I'm happy to answer what my regular day looks like nowadays. Get to school. I'm going to start you right at the beginning here. I have like a 20-minute commute in which I listen to typically a book on tape, and I am training myself up to listening to books on tape at higher and higher speeds. That's a super nerdy thing to admit, but your ear
speed reading.
your ear can get used to it, and you can end up taking in more information. So right now I'm up to 2.2 speed, and I can hear and understand. It took a while to get to that level, but pretty much means I can read a book a week in my commutes. And
nice.
Yeah, so that's how I start my day. Get to school, boom, and I like to get there about 20 minutes early so I can kind of set things up a little bit. And in my pandemic teaching, I have definitely found kind of organization matters way more in this situation than it did before for me. Before I have taught world history at my current position. This is my 13th year. And, I know good ways to deliver information. I know really great strategies to use on the fly. So if like something erupts in my class and it's like that's a teachable moment in which they need to work in groups, I could just do that on a fly, whether that's use some Legos or ask challenging questions or structure a discussion a certain way that makes it really interesting and engaging for students. Now you don't have access to all of those teaching methods. And so, I feel like it really does matter now that you have kind of a well-detailed like lesson plan. Like, what am I doing in this time with these kids? Because you can't pull something out really quick and on the fly and just be able to do a really engaging lesson quickly. So now what I have them do is the first things first, they come in and they go to my website where I use Google Sites. And each lesson is detailed there. So it'll say like lesson 5, because that's the next lesson. And it walks them through exactly what we're going to do. So there's a quote of the day. They end up having to write down what the quote of the day is and their sort of thoughts about it. This is like my bell ringer this year. I usually do this. It's less formal usually, but I usually do a quote of the day. Then we discuss it as a class. And I find it a really good time to sort of infuse SEL, social emotional learning skills, right along your lesson, because we're looking at these like powerful quotes about, doing your best, leaning into the experience, these kind of things. And so that starts my lesson. Then after that, on the webpage, it'll tell you like what our coursework is, and we'll kind of go through that. And I have tried all sorts of things, which we can kind of get into here if we want. But we kind of do the coursework. Then I call my homework independent expeditions. So then we have an independent expedition. I kind of tell them what that's going to be. And I teach in middle school. I teach usually I have 5 classes overall. And so I do that kind of throughout the day. And then I'm an advisor. So we have lunch in the classroom. So I got to feed the kids. That's always an interesting thing that I've never thought I would be a lunch staff member in my career.
Expert as well.
Yeah. So there you go. I'm whipping up lunch and serving that for the kids. I got to wipe desks in between classes. I got to remember to close down my Zoom meeting and reopen a Zoom meeting. So there's a lot going on in my day. But what I take solace in is the fact that kids, so again, I teach middle school, I teach 6th grade. And I think any K-12 teacher will say one of the reasons they got into teaching is to help students sort of help students become kind of the best they can be. And while this is an incredibly difficult year, and, I wish we could go back to pre-pandemic sort of teaching, that's just a wish. But when I focus on my purpose, like why did I join teaching as a profession? And a key reason is that I wanted to shape the future today. And there hasn't been ever in my career a bigger need to do that. So when you focus on the purpose, my purpose has kind of doubled or tripled in this moment to help 6th graders in the midst of a global pandemic still learn and still be passionate learners and excited learners to explore. And it's where I find my work, my other passion, right, to present about gamified experiences and using game mechanics and truly engineering a classroom experience so that's the greatest it can be for your students. I find these times to be even more important to do that work.
Wow. Exciting, inspiring. I love that introduction because it lets us in not only into, all the perks, all the things that you've done, all the fantastic stuff, but also, a bit more into your passion and what it looks like and why you're there and how you're keeping yourself inspired even in these difficulties that all of us who are teaching, we've in some way, shape or form have definitely experienced to a certain extent. So Michael, we've talked about difficulties as well. We've talked about some of the new challenges you're facing, but I want to talk specifically about a story of a time in which you had what we like to call a favorite fail or first attempt in learning. One of those times when things, you were going north, things went south, didn't go as you expected. We want to be there. We want to be in that story. We want to be there exploring with you. I know that's one of the key words in here. So we want to be there. We want to learn with you.
Yeah. So one, I got to admit, I have had my fair share of fails over the years in my teaching career. And I guess advice for any new teacher out there or somebody that's considering becoming a teacher is sort of pay attention to what works in your classroom. I know this sounds like really silly, easy advice, but my point is over time, you'll build sort of this satchel of quick ideas that you can pull out. This is almost what I was sort of referencing earlier in the podcast, that like I can build a pretty good experience on the fly because I have these little ideas I can pull out and use because I know they've worked in my like 15, 16 years of teaching. When you pay attention to those, and I mean, I'm still doing some little quick activity that I figured out my second year in teaching, but like I chose to sort of catalog that and keep that in my repertoire. And, obviously add to that repertoire. And now 16, 17 years into teaching, I got like 30 little ideas that I can sprinkle in at any point. And part of that where it connects to failure is, try new things, but then also remember to sort of document and keep the ones that work so that you can sprinkle those in. But one of my favorite failures I talk about is a friend of mine, Carrie Backham, who is big into sketchnoting. She does gamification as well. We always joke that we have these bulletin boards in our classrooms that we say it's where good ideas go to die, because we've tried to use these bulletin boards in some sort of gamified capacity. So for those of you that don't know me, I do pretty extensive gamification where it's like it is a year-long story, with little vignettes happening here and there, and kids are getting power-ups and these kind of things. And much like a video game, they're gaining experience points and they're getting these little power-ups that let them break some rules in the game or maybe even in my classroom. And then I look at these bulletin boards and I'm like, there's got to be something I can do with these in the game. And I have tried like idea after idea each year, like trying a new twist, like, I've done like little tournament brackets there, and they were good for like the unit, but like I couldn't sustain it long term. And again, I have a long term game. I eventually thought, well, my game is in the realm of nobles. It's this medieval society. I thought, we got to have like a map, and like we're going to put a map there, and we're going to like let people sort of travel to various cities. In various cities, we're going to do things. And I had this complex structure where they could like move so often and do this stuff, but it was too heavy. It was too weighty. Like the reality is, as a middle school teacher, I don't see my kids every day. I don't have them all day. I'm not an elementary teacher that sees them, that maybe could have that big of an experience because they could move in their English class. And then when the teacher teaches them, math, they could like move in the math class, right? They would see them enough times that this would work. This was total failure. Like they didn't get enough moves. It didn't make sense. Like I couldn't really explain all the rules quick enough. So it was very top heavy.
What would you say in that experience? And sorry if I'm interrupting, but there's like many things there to sort of deconstruct, and I think it's a very good example. But what would you say is 1, 2, maybe even 3 key elements that you say, well, I think what I learned from this experience is this and this, or I wouldn't repeat, not only not doing the map and the bulletin board itself, but some, sort of trying to generalize from that experience, if there's anything that you can draw from that.
Wow. So like the end of that story is I do have a system that I really like on this bulletin board, but I got to tell you, like, I think that was after like 5 years. That was like, it was the 5th iteration, 5th attempt. And it is no longer a map. Like that's been removed, but like continuing to sort of stare at that. And I think a good visionary teacher is also somebody that has the strength to see it through, right? Like I stare at those bulletin boards and I choose to be bothered to become better. Right. I think other people might just say, like, it's a bulletin board. I'll just throw up work, or I'll put a little like welcome to my class sign up there. I saw it and it's like, I know through my work that gamification is powerful, that applying these mechanics are powerful. And I stared at those things and I chose to be bothered that those weren't a gamified element. To answer your direct question of what is something sort of I learned through that failure experience, one is to have that fortitude, but the other is don't get lost in the game. I mean, obviously I could, with all that I know about game mechanics, I could make the most complex, awesome game ever, but I don't know how much world history you'd learn, right? Like, because I'm dedicating so much time to like, well, you have to do this and you'd have to roll that die and you'd have to, right? It would be like super nerdy, super complex. It would be a really good game, but not necessarily a really good learning experience. And so a proper pruning of a game, like, take the mechanic and try your best to strike that right balance between it is motivating, it is inspiring, it is intriguing. It produces like a rub for the student that makes it interesting for them to move through this experience with the least amount of game weight on top of it. There is going to be some game weight, right? You're adding something to the experience. So I'm not trying to minimize it to its like 0 point. I'm just trying to strike that perfect balance, right? Think of it like seasoning in food. If you put none in, it's not seasoned. You put too much, it's terrible, right? Like, but what is that perfect balance of that seasoning that makes the entire dish sort of come together? Some of those maps were too weighty. It was way too much seasoning, right? And just striking that right balance is so important.
Very, very nice. And I think it's becoming sort of a topic in the past few weeks, like how much complexity you want to add. And I mentioned it last time as well. I'm going to very quickly say it again. I have a friend in gamification. She's more sort of in the corporate world, more than in education. And one of the things she likes to say is, think of when you're adding another game mechanic, think that each of those game mechanics cost 10,000, whether that's dollars. She's working in the UK, British pounds, euros, whatever that looks like. It has to be a relatively big number so that you consider that your budget is not unlimited, right? And your time is not unlimited. So, how much can you prune out of that, as you were saying, until that point where you reach what you actually need to make it the most engaging? And as well, it's not going to be less good if you have less of these things. Actually, it can be a lot better if it's too weighty. As Michael was saying, I think there is a lot of opportunity to improve there. So very, very, very good learning. I love that experience as well. And Michael, we've talked about failure. We've talked about some challenges, but I'd like to know of one of the many things that you've had success doing in your classroom using your gamification strategies. Like, can you tell us a story of one of these things? And of course, if we can know of any sort of, ideas that you think were that sort of led you to that, we'd be delighted as well.
That's...
So again, this is a story of something that went well for you that you're sort of proud of in your the game that you apply in your classroom, the year-long game, some of the elements you introduced, and sort of maybe what inspiration took you there, or maybe what were some of the keys to the success, if I may.
No, 100%. It was more like just, not to pat myself on the back. I hope anybody that's done gamification realizes like there are so many there's just a flood of moments in my head that are proud moments with students, proud moments with other teachers. So I don't know, to choose one of the successes, I think that this is going to be kind of a general experience, but it is one of the things I'm most proud of is gamification. When you're applying game mechanics, you are making the experience in some respects more difficult. You're adding intentional sort of roadblocks or hurdles that kids have to sort of contend with while interacting with the content. And I didn't necessarily set out for this outcome, but what happens, and it has happened time and time again, is I'll get students that come back to my class, whether I teach sixth, so whether it's the 7th grade year, 8th grade year, 9th grade year, or whatever, but kids come back and they really sort of speak to my class, which is a history class, is one of the things that they felt best prepared them moving forward, because it just put them in constant sort of challenge mode and like how to overcome that challenge with a constant aim at like doing your best, because a game has kind of that endless, you can gain more and more points in the game, not in my grades, by doing better and better. So like where school sort of tops out, like there's a diminishing return, like to try to get like an A+ from an A, it's probably not actually worth your investment of time to try to get the A+, because like you're either that talented that comes naturally, or you're going to have to spend like 20 more hours on the project just to make it go up 2 percentage points, right? Where gamification, it's an endless expanse, and kids then get into this mindset of applying their best, doing their best, and then they get empowered by doing their best. And then they literally, that empowerment makes them move into the next experience with a broader horizon. They see things they couldn't see before, and then they rise to that challenge, and then again, broaden the horizon. So this history class, which arguably like the content itself fades into the background, and what they leave with is truly like just a way more equipped student to sort of kind of handle any challenge. And I don't know, that is my favorite success, that not an English class, not a math class, this history class is what truly like armed them moving forward. And it allowed them to sort of walk with a greater stride, I think, in all the educational challenges they face.
Well, engagers, if you were not inspired by that, I don't know if you have to check your pulse or something. I think if you're in any capacity interested or into education, I think that kind of experiences is what we're always aiming for, I would say, and definitely knowing that has come through using those game experiences, and it makes sense, as you were saying. Like in games, you can just give it a bit more and give it a bit more, and you give it a bit more and you get a little bit more. You put a lot more, you get a lot more as well from the game. It's that constant feedback. It's one of the things that keep people engaged and hooked, if you may, in the best of senses. And Michael, I mean, there's a lot of inspiration. I know as well that you probably have a lot more details of this in your book, but do you have any sort of series of steps? What does your process look like? Let's say you're introducing a new game mechanic, or let's say you're helping even another professor, or a teacher, which I know you do as well, to introduce gamification into their classroom. What does that look like? What do you tell them to do? What do you tell them to explore, to think about?
Well, I mean, the first thing you want to look at is what's the scope of where you're going to try to insert this gamification. And it truly, these are scientific principles. These are tried and true. We have data on these. You could sprinkle these mechanics into just a lesson. So in one hand, you could be just saying, I want to see some of this in action. And if that's all that a professor or teacher wants, we might look at something that's an easy mechanic that you don't have to teach kids about, but I could teach the educator about. So I'm thinking about something like the time mechanic. There are ways to use that different than we use it in traditional sense in school that can be way more engaging. So I might teach them about the time mechanic and how they could apply that to just a lesson. Just see how this changes the feel in your classroom, right? If they were no, I want to make a more immersive experience that might be for the unit, right? So we might be doing this experience for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. Or like I do, the whole course. If we're talking about those kind of things, then I usually have a conversation with them about, I like to break it down into theme, team, and task. These three, I think, do a nice job of summing up the experience, at least lightly. If this is the opening conversation, if they're like, I want to do what you do, without getting super into the weeds about it, what's a theme that we could center this experience around? And it doesn't have to be your actual course, right? So I teach world history. We just finished up Egypt. It doesn't have to be a theme about Egypt. In fact, mine isn't, right? Mine's the Roman nobles in some sort of European medieval society, yet we were learning about Egypt, right? So it can really be different. But what's a theme that they would like, or that they think would work really well with their students? One of those two. So you got theme.
And when you say they, you're talking about the teacher.
The
right?
teacher. I tend to say, there's a lot of teachers that do, my kids like Minecraft, so I center it around Minecraft. That works. The cautionary tale I always tell teachers, though, is so much of what I'm telling you to do is through the power of language. You go to my class, it's not cobblestone walls, right? I don't have tapestries hanging to show that it's the medieval time period. I don't dress up in armored suits and stuff. So much of it is the power of language. We are creating an imaginary space in which, yes, I refer to that group instead of being group one. They're they're a guild. But again, I don't have tapestries on the wall. It's just language. So the cautionary tale, if you choose a thing that the students like because you're trying to get them to like it, that to me becomes a little more chocolate covered broccoli, because you don't know the thing that well. I don't play, for example, I don't own an Xbox, so I don't play Halo. But if I knew my kids loved Halo and I tried to theme my game around Halo, how much language could I bring? How much could I carry that experience? I really couldn't. It's important that it's important to you. I like medieval times. I think that's a cool age in history. So for me to think in that space, bring that language. I don't forget to call them guilds because this would be a cool place. I wish I could make this a medieval society. I wish I could have tapestries on the wall. So I don't forget to bring that language. But when I find teachers that try to gamify around what the students like and not what they actually like as teachers, it putters out, right? They're not able to carry that theme for the full 4 weeks. They do a great launch. We're doing Halo. This is awesome. We're going to, they use some of the Halo language. And then, 3 days into the experience, it's just a regular English class, and they're like, don't forget to turn in your assignments. Like, no, those aren't assignments. They're missions. Like you got to use the language. You got to apply that theme with your words, with your language, and you have to be excited about it. But if I don't play Halo, how excited can I be? I can't build this experience up. But like, I would totally love to have medieval experiences. So yeah, I can sit here and talk about having a grand, like town gathering and stuff like that. I can have like sword fights or whatever. I can say those things because like I can conjure those up in my mind because it's an experience I like and I care about.
Cool.
But again, plenty of teachers do it on what they like. So that's theme. Team is, I try to get them to think about what are ways. A big area in gaming is the social aspect, like is doing things together, having some social status. So things like badges, those kind of things, working together collaboratively. So what could you do in your course? How could we change an element of your course that would allow for greater collaboration together with students so that they have that game element where they did something together, they banded together and defeated something, they worked together on this project. But again, remove that language of project and apply your theme. So this is why I start with theme, then team, then task, because you're rolling in one level into the next. So when we talk about the team aspect, how are you applying your theme to that team, right? And then task is what teachers are ultimately really good at. It's what you were going to do anyways. Like, what's the project you have the kids do in your class? What are the assignments you have your kids do in your class? What quizzes and tests do you have your kids do in your class? How can we now apply that theme, apply that team into those tasks? And then all of a sudden you have this cohesive, immersive experience that is far more engaging. And with the right mechanics sprinkled in, you're actually going to get some scientific sort of boosts in engagement and outcomes ultimately.
That is absolutely exciting. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Michael, what would you say is, if there's, you've done talks, you've done workshops, you've done so many things in this world of gamification, especially in education, but would you say there is some sort of best practice, not to call it a silver bullet, but something that if you think of these things, if you introduce this strategy in your creation of your game, of your gamified strategy, that you think it would like almost always improve that project, that idea? Is there such a thing that you could name?
Specifically, like within gamification. So what's an aspect of gamification or game-based learning?
Yeah, gamification itself, I would say both of us are convinced that would be one of the best practices in education. So
yeah.
If we can take it one step further, that would be amazing.
I will be happy to take it one step further. Before we take it one step further, though, I do just want to say, I have been gamifying now for over 10 years.
Wow.
And there's sometimes I wish that the title could be different. I think that what keeps gamification, it is growing. We are doing more and more of it in school, and I love that. But where it hasn't reached like the same sort of every school doing it, every classroom sort of doing it, is I think that name, the game piece, something I absolutely love. I love games. But educators, rightfully so, take their classroom very seriously. Again, rightfully so, that they do so. So sometimes I wish gamification could have had a different title, because it is, as you said, in my opinion, humble opinion, probably horribly biased, but it is such a powerful pedagogy because it encompasses all aspects of the student experience, all aspects of the teacher's experience. So I don't know another thing. We can talk about like doing project-based learning. That's great, but that doesn't hit all aspects, right? Like there's nothing to me that like fully encompasses the student experience, fully puts the learner in the center of all design choices. Like I don't know another thing that does it to that level. And then at the same time, allows so many interesting entry points. Like you don't have to get the success I'm talking about. You don't have to have my fully immersive year-long experience. You don't have to go that far. You could literally do something just today and you will see it again. Like I don't know another pedagogy that lets you have that easy of an entry with that long runway if you want it. Like, holy cow. Like I don't know. I'm blown away at like how powerful this experience is. And whatever listeners out there that's still on the fence, give it a try. Give it a try. But to answer your question, to go like one step further inside gamification, what is something that approaches silver bullet status, I guess? I personally, one of my favorite mechanics to use that I think we all could apply, and it would make our classrooms at very least more interesting, which interesting is a level of engagement, right? Would be the Easter egg mechanic. Not hard for us to create Easter eggs, just like the name implies. It's hidden things around that you don't need to find. So even in your college class, like it would take you a little bit of extra time to add sort of a hidden thing to a document, right? Like type the text, like in a shared Google Doc in which they're reading their like project requirements, put down below like a cryptic message and then change the font color to white so they don't see it unless they literally like highlight it. Even if the message is just like, whatever, give me a high five on your way to class, which you can't do now. So that was probably a terrible example. But it would just make you more human. It would make the experience more human. And this idea of random payout, like not knowing like, oh, so does he hide other things? Like, I wonder what's on that next assignment. And maybe there isn't anything on the next assignment, but that like variable payout, much like a slot machine, is engaging, right? Like we don't know what that next experience is going to bring. And you can do that so easily with Easter eggs. Like, why not add that to your class? Why not sprinkle that in? Or like I said, the time mechanic's another good one. If you start to read about how to apply the time mechanic to experiences in your classroom, oh my gosh, there's so many fun and engaging ways that would be so quick to do. And it doesn't add really any like setup time to your lesson. It's not going to cause you to like spend weekends, making this experience. Like you're adding a time mechanic, you're adding a light Easter egg mechanic, but it would change the experience and the relationship between you and your student.
Very, very exciting, very useful. And as you said, it's something that could give you sort of a small dip into the whole gamification experience for your classroom. I love Easter eggs as well. And Michael, is there, you've been already, we've spent already quite a few minutes together. You were as well in the previous interview when you were talking about the Hive Summit. When you hear these questions, the vibe of the podcast, is there somebody that comes to your mind, somebody you'd like to listen to in an episode like this one, another guest in Professor Game?
I would absolutely love to have you have on Stephanie Crawford. She is somebody that has experienced gamifying in her classroom. And then she has moved from her classroom to being sort of a tech integrator, if you will. And then eventually switched from there to like district-wide sort of best practice sort of coach, if you will. And she gamified the whole experience. So like a district, multiple buildings, she put teams, mixed teams. So you're on teams with other educators in different buildings and built in all the mechanics we're talking about to inspire teachers to gain pedagogy and learn and level up in the district system. And I have never heard of a better system. Like hers was just fantastic. I'd love to hear an episode with her.
Sounds super, super exciting. So Stephanie, I hope you're listening and we will have you in the show very, very soon. Michael, we know you're an author. We know Explore Like a Pirate is a fantastic book. So if you had to think of somebody, who already has your book, is there any other book that you would recommend, maybe to sit right next to your book as well, right next to Explore Like a Pirate?
Yeah. This is tough. I got to admit, like I'd be honored to have my book sit next to several others. One of the ones that I think I'd really like you all to read, so there's a bit of a book suggestion as well, is a book by Todd Rose called The End of Average: How We Succeed in a World That Values Sameness. Obviously we all read things with our own lens, with our own experience, our own backstories. And so for me, so steeped in gamification, to read a book that is talking about kind of how average doesn't actually exist. Yet we as educators tend to build our classroom experiences around an average. We tend to say like, this is what a sixth grader can do, so I'm going to build the sixth grade experience. The reality is there is no such thing as average. And when you design for average, you're actually designing for no one, because no one is the average. Like the average is an amalgamation of, the low and the high, but no one is actually the average. So you're kind of wasting your time designing experiences for no one. And then when I attach that to my own work, and the book has so many examples that at least I couldn't help but read and think of gamification where, oh my gosh, gamification would solve that answer, right? Because you are differentiating a ton. You are building experiences for the low, the middle, the high, right? But you're actually thinking of your students. You're actually personalizing it and not just generalizing it to some generic average that doesn't exist.
Absolutely. Where there's so many differences, and it's funny because I used to be teaching quantitative methods, so a lot of statistics, a lot of averages, and forecasting. And one of the things that we always say is that even when we make a forecast, forecasts are always wrong because what you forecast is not going to be what actually happens in the end, right? Mm-hmm. So it kind of blends in a more sort of nerdy and math way than would have expected, but it makes a lot of sense. I haven't read the book, but it sounds like something that I should definitely take into account for future reading. It's
so good. It's so good. I think we all should read that as educators. Again, even if you're not gamifying, it does give you a lot of thought around like how what and how we create things in industry, and then obviously our industry of education.
Absolutely. And what would you say, Michael, when we're talking about gamification, gamifying your classroom, you as well being, one of a great speaker nationwide, and I think you're one step, if you're not already, into not being only nationwide but worldwide as well, being a speaker in many places. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your superpower when talking about these topics, when whether it's inspiring or whatever that looks like for you?
So that's hard, right? Like I'm blushing here. You can't see it on the podcast, but that's hard to talk about yourself in that capacity. What I'd like to think my professional development offers teachers and educators alike is I try to blend inspiration, because I think we have to understand where we could get to, right? You have to sell the vision a little bit. But at the same time, being a practicing teacher, and I really am proud of that. Over the years, I could have given up that. Like I definitely get asked to speak enough that I could have gone full-time speaking. But I don't ever want to lose the practical. Like I think when you go full-time speaking, you lose a bit of that practical. And that's what I love about my professional development. I think it's a healthy mix of inspirational, selling you the vision, letting you see a little window into what your world could be like, and then helping you get there.
Wow, absolutely a superpower. And that's exactly what, at least when I go to a talk, that's exactly what I'm expecting to be, inspired if it's something that I'm not already inspired by, but also as well to be able to see how that kind of works in the real world. Absolutely fantastic. And this is going to be probably the most difficult question of the day, Michael, because I saw your IKEA or whatever place you had your games there. So this is going to be, not only for you, but for many other guests, a difficult question, and they've already said it. What would you say, Michael, is your favorite game?
So I'm going to dodge this question. I'm going to give you a political answer. There are like so many great games, and it really depends the experience you want to have or who you're playing with. So an impossible question to answer, but what I will do is give you like one of my new favorites. Like, so people that are looking into getting into the game, playing games with friends or family, one that I really found this year that is a great entry point for anybody. And if you happen to be a gamer, still a great game to pick up. So just works for everyone, is a small 2-player card game called Air, Land, and Sea. It's a micro game, so there's only 18 cards, I believe. And it produces just such interesting, I can't believe 18 cards. I could play that game over and over and over again, and it always feels a little different. It's quick. And as I said, it's 18 cards, so it can fit in your pocket. So someday when we are able to go out for a coffee, you and I could easily like just take that to the cafe and play it right there. And it's, 15, 20-minute game. And if you have more time, it is one of those that's so fun that you're like, oh yeah, let's load that up again and play it like you would, like you would a video game. Like, oh no, we're doing that one again.
We're getting better at this for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Constant improvement, all that feedback that you get, all that excitement that we get from games, and it's where we gather all of that, all those lessons and all those things that we want. We want to see your students as excited or almost as excited with their learning as they are with playing those and many other games as well. So, Michael, we're running out of time, but of course, I want to give you any final piece of advice you want to leave our engagers with, this audience that is interested in gamification and games, especially in education and learning. Anything you want to leave us with, of course, let us know where we can find you, or reiterate that. We mentioned your webpage if there's anything else. And then, once it's all said and done, we'll say that it's game over.
Nice. So everyone, again, contact me or connect with me and can see all the things that I'm up to on mrmatera.com. I think that's a great spot because, I have podcasts, I have YouTube, I got blog posts, I got Twitter, Instagram, right? So it's just best go there. If I come up with a new thing, it'll be there. So going there is really good. The other thing I want to leave you guys with, and truly not a pitch to my book. There are many books in this space that would be good to pick up. Obviously, I'd be humbled. I'd be honored if you end up picking up Explore Like a Pirate. It is a book that I truly tried to write in the same way that I do my PDs, right? So there is some inspiration there. There's things that are trying to get you to get through this experience. But at the same time, it is a chock full of practical applications, things that you could sprinkle in. Be honored if you pick that up. But ultimately, I want to help you create a great experience for your classroom. And if that means picking up some of the other great books out there, John Meehan has a great one. Adrenaline Rush, definitely pick that one up. Quinn Rollins, Play Like a Pirate. Not really gamification, but these are great things you could sprinkle in your class, again, to be a little more playful, dynamic. There, like I said, so many great things in this space. And I just want to encourage you to check it out. Don't be discouraged by the name. This is powerful pedagogy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we can find you all of those contact mediums at your page, mrmatera.com. Very, very powerful advice is to pick up a book and find all that practical advice from many, many different authors. And of course, Michael Matera's is definitely Explore Like a Pirate. And that could be a good, very good starting point or midpoint or, wherever you're at. I'm sure it can help you. And thank you very much for all the advice, all the experience, all the value bombs that you've dropped in this episode, Michael. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Mr. Matera, with Mike. And as you know, every now and then we have these random questions, and they come directly from you, the Engagers. Is there a question you'd like to make? All you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question there on the fields. If it is selected, and you have a pretty good chance, it will come up in a future episode and you will get your answer live in an episode. And of course, before you go on to your next mission, remember, if you haven't, to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.